Welcome to True Crime Threads, where we unravel the darkest mysteries one thread at a time. Today, we dive into the chilling story of a celebrated heart surgeon who murdered his assistant to hide a terrible secret. Dr. Elliot Grayson was a celebrated heart surgeon, known for his groundbreaking techniques and charming personality. At 45, he had it all: a luxurious mansion in the hills, a loving wife who adored him, and a thriving career at St. Vincent's Hospital, where he was regarded as a miracle worker. Patients traveled from across the country to be treated by him, and his colleagues often referred to him as the Golden Surgeon for his seemingly flawless track record. But behind the polished facade of success and admiration, Dr. Grayson harbored a dark secret that threatened to unravel his perfect life. For years, Dr. Grayson had been secretly experimenting with unapproved surgical methods on his patients. These risky procedures were his way of pushing the boundaries of medical science, but they often came at a devastating cost. Many of his patients suffered severe complications, and some even died on the operating table. To cover his tracks, Dr. Grayson meticulously falsified medical records, attributing the failures to pre-existing conditions or unforeseen complications. His reputation remained untarnished, and no one suspected the truth until Clara Bennett, his trusted assistant, stumbled upon the horrifying reality. Clara, a 28-year-old medical professional, had always admired Dr. Grayson. She had worked tirelessly by his side for 5 years, organizing his schedules, managing patient files, and assisting in surgeries. She believed in his brilliance and dedication to saving lives. But one evening, while organizing a stack of old patient records, she noticed inconsistencies. Files were missing, dates didn't add up, and some patients who had supposedly died from natural causes had shown no signs of such conditions prior to surgery. Curious and concerned, Clara dug deeper, cross-referencing records and uncovering a pattern of negligence and deceit. What she found shook her to her core. Dr. Grayson had been using his patients as guinea pigs, testing unproven techniques without their knowledge or consent. The ethical violation was staggering, and the human cost was unbearable. Clara knew she couldn't stay silent. She confronted Dr. Grayson, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and fear. She demanded that he stop his unethical practices immediately, and threatened to expose him if he refused. Dr. Grayson, ever the master manipulator, assured Clara that he would change. He apologized profusely, claiming that his actions were driven by a misguided desire to advance medical science. He begged for her understanding, and promised to abandon his experiments. Clara, torn between her loyalty to him and her moral duty, agreed to give him a chance. But deep down, she remained uneasy. She began documenting everything she had discovered, creating a secret file of evidence in case she needed to protect herself or the truth. Unbeknownst to Clara, Dr. Grayson had no intention of stopping. Her discovery had planted the seeds of fear in his mind, and he couldn't afford to let her jeopardize everything he had built. His reputation, his career, his entire life, it all hinged on maintaining the illusion of perfection. He began to see Clara not as a loyal assistant, but as a threat that needed to be eliminated. And so, he started planning. He scheduled surgeries, arranged alibis, and carefully calculated his every move, all while maintaining his charming facade. The Golden Surgeon was about to commit his darkest act yet, and Clara Bennett was walking straight into his trap. One rainy evening, Clara Bennett failed to return home after work. Her roommate, Sarah, grew increasingly worried as the hours passed. Clara was always punctual, and she had mentioned nothing about staying late at the hospital. Sarah called Clara's phone repeatedly, but it went straight to voicemail. By midnight, Sarah's concern turned to panic. She contacted St. Vincent's Hospital, but the staff confirmed that Clara had left hours ago. Security footage from the hospital's parking garage showed Clara entering the area at 7:15 p.m., but there was no record of her exiting. Her car, a silver sedan, was found the next morning in a remote corner of the garage. Keys still in the ignition and her belongings untouched. The police were called, and an investigation was launched. Detectives interviewed hospital staff, including Dr. Grayson, who appeared visibly shaken by Clara's disappearance. He expressed his concern, describing Clara as a dedicated and irreplaceable member of his team. He provided a detailed account of his whereabouts that evening, stating that he had been performing a complex surgery from 6 p.m. until well past midnight. His alibi was corroborated by multiple witnesses, including nurses and anesthesiologists who had been in the operating room with him. The police had no reason to suspect him. Clara's family and friends were devastated. They described her as a responsible and caring person who would never vanish without explanation. Her parents flew in from out of state, pleading with the public for information. Flyers with Clara's photo were posted across the city, and news outlets covered the story extensively. Despite the widespread attention, no leads emerged. The case grew cold, leaving Clara's loved ones in a state of agonizing uncertainty. Unbeknownst to the police, Dr. Grayson had meticulously planned every detail of Clara's disappearance. He had chosen the rainy evening deliberately, knowing that the weather would reduce foot traffic in the parking garage. He had also ensured that his surgery coincided with the time of her vanishing, creating an airtight alibi. But his plan went deeper than that. Weeks earlier, he had begun subtly manipulating Clara's schedule, assigning her tasks that required her to stay late, and ensuring she would be alone in the garage. He had even planted the idea in her mind that she needed to organize some old files, knowing she would take the bait. On the night of her disappearance, Dr. Grayson had intercepted Clara in the parking garage. Using his charm and authority, he convinced her to follow him to a secluded area under the pretense of discussing a sensitive matter. Once there, he incapacitated her with a powerful sedative he had stolen from the hospital's supply. He then loaded her unconscious body into the trunk of his car, which he had parked in a blind spot not covered by security cameras. Under the cover of darkness, he drove her to a remote location, far from prying eyes. The police, unaware of Dr. Grayson's involvement, focused their efforts on other possibilities. They considered the idea that Clara might have been the victim of a random abduction, or that she had chosen to disappear voluntarily. But her family and friends insisted that neither scenario made sense. Clara had been planning a vacation with Sarah, and she had recently spoken about her excitement for an upcoming medical conference. There was no indication that she had been unhappy or under any unusual stress. As the days turned into weeks, the investigation stalled. The police had no physical evidence, no witnesses, and no motive to pursue. Dr. Grayson continued his work at the hospital, his reputation untarnished. But beneath his calm exterior, he was constantly on edge, fearing that some small detail might expose his crime. He monitored the news closely, relieved when the media coverage began to wane. For a time it seemed as though Clara Bennett had vanished without a trace, and Dr. Grayson's terrible secret remained safe. But the truth has a way of surfacing, and Clara's story was far from over. Months passed with no leads, and the case of Clara Bennett's disappearance grew colder. The police had exhausted all avenues, and the media attention had dwindled. But Clara's best friend, Mia, refused to give up. She was convinced that Clara would never vanish without a trace and that something sinister had happened to her. Determined to find answers, Mia began digging into Clara's life, hoping to uncover a clue that the police might have missed. Mia started by going through Clara's apartment, meticulously searching for anything that might shed light on her disappearance. She found nothing unusual at first, but then she remembered Clara's laptop. Clara had always been meticulous about keeping records, and Mia wondered if she might have stored something important on her computer. She took the laptop to a tech-savvy friend, who helped her bypass the password. What they found was both shocking and revealing. The laptop contained a series of encrypted files, each labeled with cryptic names. It took weeks of trial and error, but Mia finally cracked the password truth. Inside the files were detailed notes about Dr. Grayson's unethical practices, including dates, patient names, and outcomes. Clara had been building a case against him, documenting everything she could. The files revealed that Dr. Grayson had been experimenting on patients without their consent, often with fatal results. Clara had also recorded her own suspicions and fears, writing about how she had confronted Dr. Grayson and how he had promised to change. But her notes made it clear that she didn't trust him and had been gathering evidence to expose him if necessary. Mia was horrified by what she read. She realized that Clara's disappearance was likely connected to her discovery of Dr. Grayson's crimes. She immediately took the files to the police, reigniting the investigation. Detectives were stunned by the depth of Clara's documentation and the gravity of the allegations against Dr. Grayson. They reopened the case, this time focusing on the celebrated surgeon. The police began by subpoenaing Dr. Grayson's financial records. They discovered large, unexplained cash withdrawals around the time of Clara's disappearance. They also found that he had purchased a remote cabin in the woods just weeks before she vanished. The timing was suspicious, and the police obtained a warrant to search the property. Meanwhile, they re-interviewed hospital staff, looking for any inconsistencies in Dr. Grayson's alibi. While his story still held up, some colleagues mentioned that he had seemed unusually stressed in the weeks leading up to Clara's disappearance. As the investigation progressed, the police uncovered more troubling details. They learned that Dr. Grayson had access to powerful sedatives, which could have been used to incapacitate Clara. They also found that he had a history of controlling behavior, with several former assistants describing him as manipulative and demanding. While none of this was enough to prove his involvement in Clara's disappearance, it painted a picture of a man capable of extreme actions to protect his reputation. Mia, meanwhile, continued her own investigation. She reached out to Clara's former colleagues, hoping to piece together her final days. One nurse recalled seeing Clara and Dr. Grayson having a tense conversation in the hospital hallway, though she couldn't hear what was said. Another mentioned that Clara had seemed anxious in the days before her disappearance, often staying late to organize files. These small details added to the growing suspicions surrounding Dr. Grayson. The police knew they needed more concrete evidence to build a case against him. The encrypted files were damning, but they didn't directly link him to Clara's disappearance. They needed something irrefutable, a smoking gun, that would prove his guilt. That breakthrough would come when they finally searched the remote cabin, a place that held the key to unraveling Dr. Grayson's dark secrets. But for now, the investigation was gaining momentum, and the walls were closing in on the Golden Surgeon. The police obtained a warrant to search Dr. Grayson's remote cabin, a secluded property deep in the woods. The location was so isolated that it took investigators hours to reach it, and the overgrown driveway suggested it hadn't been used in months. But, as they approached the cabin, they noticed signs of recent activity: fresh tire tracks in the mud, and a padlock on the door that looked newer than the rusted hinges it secured. The atmosphere was eerie, and the team felt a sense of foreboding as they entered the property. Inside, the cabin appeared ordinary at first glance. It was sparsely furnished, with a dusty couch, a small kitchenette, and a bedroom with an unmade bed. But as they searched more thoroughly, one of the officers noticed a loose floorboard in the corner of the living room. Beneath it was a hidden trap door, leading to a basement that had been carefully concealed. The discovery sent a chill through the team. They descended the narrow staircase, flashlights cutting through the darkness, and what they found was horrifying. The basement had been converted into a makeshift operating room. A surgical table stood in the center, surrounded by medical equipment that had clearly been stolen from St. Vincent's Hospital. The walls were lined with shelves containing vials of sedatives, syringes, and other supplies. Bloodstains on the floor and table were immediately collected for analysis, and the forensic team confirmed that the DNA matched Clara Bennett's. The evidence was damning, but it only grew worse as they continued their search. In a corner of the basement, investigators found a stack of journals hidden behind a loose panel in the wall. The journals belonged to Dr. Grayson, and they contained detailed entries about his crimes. He had written extensively about his unethical experiments, describing how he had used patients as test subjects and covered up his failures. But the most chilling entries were about Clara. He had documented his plan to silence her, recounting how he had drugged her, brought her to the cabin, and attempted to perform a surgery that would make her death look like an accident. He had even sketched out the procedure, noting the precise steps he would take to ensure her body would never be found. According to the journals, something had gone wrong during the surgery. Clara had died before he could complete the procedure, and Dr. Grayson had panicked. He described how he had disposed of her body in a nearby ravine, covering it with leaves and debris to hide it from view. The police immediately organized a search of the area, and within hours, they found Clara's remains. The discovery was a grim confirmation of what the journals had revealed, and it provided the evidence needed to arrest Dr. Grayson. When confronted with the findings, Dr. Grayson initially denied everything. He claimed that the journals were fabricated and that someone was trying to frame him. But as the evidence piled up, his story began to unravel. The bloodstains, the stolen medical equipment, and the location of Clara's body all pointed to his guilt. The police also discovered that he had purchased the cabin under a fake name, further proof of his intent to conceal his crimes. The arrest of Dr. Grayson sent shockwaves through the community. Patients who had once revered him were horrified to learn the truth, and his colleagues struggled to reconcile the man they thought they knew with the monster he had become. The media coverage was relentless, and the case became a national sensation. But for Clara's family and friends, the arrest was a bittersweet victory. They had finally found the truth, but it came at an unimaginable cost. The golden surgeon's facade had crumbled, revealing the darkness that had always lurked beneath. During the trial, Dr. Elliot Grayson's defense team argued that he was mentally unstable, driven to madness by the immense pressure of his career. They painted him as a man who had sacrificed everything for his work, only to crack under the weight of his own expectations. The prosecution, however, presented a different narrative. A cold, calculating individual who had meticulously planned Clara Bennett's murder to protect his reputation and career. The evidence was overwhelming, and the jury deliberated for less than a day before delivering a guilty verdict. Dr. Grayson was sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. A fitting end for a man who had once been celebrated as a hero. But the story didn't end with the trial. Years later, a former patient of Dr. Grayson's came forward with a shocking revelation. The woman, who had undergone a heart surgery performed by Dr. Grayson, claimed that she had briefly woken up during the procedure. She described hearing Dr. Grayson and Clara arguing in the operating room. Clara had been pleading with him to stop his unethical practices, threatening to expose him if he didn't. Dr. Grayson's response had been chillingly calm. "You'll never get the chance." The patient had been too disoriented to fully comprehend the conversation at the time, but the memory had haunted her for years. When she learned of Clara's disappearance and Dr. Grayson's trial, she realized the significance of what she had overheard. This new testimony added another layer of horror to the case. It suggested that Clara's murder had not been a crime of passion or desperation, but a premeditated act. Dr. Grayson had known exactly what he was doing, and had taken deliberate steps to eliminate the one person who could expose his crimes. The revelation also raised questions about how many other lives he had destroyed in his quest for power and prestige. Investigators reopened old cases, re-examining the deaths of patients who had died under mysterious circumstances during Dr. Grayson's surgeries. While they were unable to definitively prove his involvement in every case, The patterns were undeniable. Dr. Grayson's legacy was no longer one of brilliance and innovation, but of deceit and destruction. Clara's family, though relieved that justice had been served, continued to grapple with the pain of her loss. They established a foundation in her name, dedicated to advocating for ethical practices in the medical field and supporting whistleblowers who risked their careers to expose wrongdoing. The foundation became a beacon of hope, ensuring that Clara's courage and commitment to the truth would never be forgotten. As for Dr. Grayson, he spent his days in a maximum security prison, isolated and despised by both inmates and staff. His once pristine reputation was in ruins, and his name became synonymous with betrayal and evil. In rare interviews, he maintained his innocence, claiming that he had been misunderstood and unfairly judged. But no one believed him. The evidence was too damning, and the lives he had destroyed were too many. The case of the heart surgeon who murdered his assistant to hide his terrible secret remains one of the most chilling true crime stories of our time. It serves as a stark reminder that even those we trust the most can harbor the darkest secrets, and that the pursuit of truth, no matter how difficult, is always worth the cost. Clara Bennett's legacy lives on, a testament to the power of courage and the enduring fight for justice.